Thank you for your patience once again, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed the luncheon that we had prepared. And now for our afternoon session, to start us off, I'd like to invite Miss Julia Hobsbawm, the author of Fully Connected, Surviving and Thriving in an Age of Overload. And she's also the honorary visiting professor of the Cass Business School in London. She will deliver her keynote address titled, Looking Ahead and Adapting in the Face of Digitalization. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming her with a big and warm round of applause.
Hello. It's a great pleasure and indeed a privilege to be invited to address you this afternoon at such an interesting forum on well-being. It is also a great pleasure and a privilege to be invited to do so here in Incheon, such an interesting city, and I would like to thank the Korean sponsors for their hospitality and the OECD for inviting me. As work-life balance is one of the dimensions and measured by the excellent and groundbreaking Better Life initiative, I would also like to thank my husband back in London because he has given up his work-life balance this week to manage our family while I'm here enjoying myself with you. So, looking ahead and adapting in the face of digitalization. Is digitalization, all 250 billion daily emails, all predictions that robot automation will shrink jobs by as much as 800 million by 2030, compatible with well-being? When there are more connected mobile devices than there are people on the planet, when productivity stays pretty stagnant, when stress has become endemic amongst the world's working population, is the aim to adapt well to digitalization or just to survive it? My thoughts on well-being are framed in the context of what I call social health. Social health is a theory and a work-in-progress management system I have designed to look at how humans can succeed and thrive better in the digital era. It builds on work I have written about in my book, Fully Connected, in my work on the board of the European Workforce Institute, and in my journalism for Strategy and Business magazine and Arianna Huffington's wellbeing portal, Thrive Global, where I'm editor-at-large. But it builds mostly on my experience as an entrepreneur. My career coincided with technology's advances, and from my first communication on a telex machine, which only some of you will remember, to Twitter today, I am a first-hand witness to the triple revolution of the internet, social, and mobile. Unlike one of my children, our daughter, whose birth date is 01/01/01, and she once said to me, "Mum, in your day, were there cars or just horses?" Yeah. I am interested in practical solutions to the digital deluge and in social progress as well as commercial success. For me, it all hinges on noticing how we organize and behave on the axis that swings from online existence to actual offline human lives. Today, humans are islands in a digital sea. It is impossible to live as a citizen without being digitally connected. Banking, boarding a plane, communicating by telephone, making a medical appointment, booking a hotel, growing a business. But the human rhythm, the scale, the speed, and the social essence is often undermined by a fatal disconnection in the design and the delivery of these digital services. You only have to see the chaos when an airport faces an outage, we have forgotten to back up our human systems. And the human system is actually pretty simple. Our default position, as neuroscience has proven, is to concern ourselves all the time, awake or asleep, talking or not, with our relationships and our social selves, who we are connected to. In short, who we love and who loves us. Meaning, that is what humans want. More, it turns out, even than trains and planes that run on time. Preferably, of course, both. Ironically, given this moment of techlash, when we have suddenly switched from blind faith to bitter disillusion with Silicon Valley, we forget that all the clever tech titans did in the first place with their algorithms was mimic the dopamine rush we get from being inherently human, from being what's called pro-social. All of this presents enormous dilemmas and conflicts, so much so that you could call this social era a crisis of social connection. Certainly, as I see it, it is a huge, pivotal moment for policymakers and strategists. When we look at well-being in the context of digitalization, we have to answer an old and rather simple question. Who is in control, the human or the machine? Surely today, measuring well-being as an individual experience and how we feel must go alongside something else. What practical adaptations to being social in the digital era we must adopt, which in themselves impact on our sense of well-being. So the central image here is China's Taihu Lite, the world's most powerful supercomputer, which has a capacity measured in something I confess I only learned about recently, petaflops. A petaflop is about a quadrillion calculation per second. That is 1 with 15 zeros. And this computer operates at 93 petaflops. The scale and speed of digital change is so staggering that it is hard, literally, to compute. Moore's law that ruled that computer circuitry would double every 2 years ran out a couple of years ago because of, well, petaflops. The reason why the human hamlet in the corner is looking worried is because all of this scale is creating a disorder. Let's call this disorder infobesity. And the small numbers in the bottom on the left explain why it's such a petaflops problem for us. I wonder how many of you recognize these numbers: 150, 168, 200. These numbers are very real to each and every human. These numbers, like the neuroscience fact that all brains have the same social wiring, affect all of us all of the time. And you will notice that they don't have that many zeros. 150 is known as Dunbar's number, the anthropological maximum number of friends and relationships humans can have at any time. We see this number in many social contexts. A company within an army has 150 soldiers, for instance. Then 168, for all the supercomputing capacity which network effects spread, we cannot grow this number. Why is it? The finite numbers of hours in the week are unchanged since the Sumerian calendar. And the number 200, well, that's roughly speaking the number of functional nations in the world. They're similar, 150, 168, 200. Of the 168, I have some bad news for all you overworkers and multitaskers. We have to sleep a third of those hours and function in basic ways like walking to the elevator or pouring coffee or getting dressed or traveling. So in practice, 56 hours in a week is about the maximum you have. And what's the number one? Well, that's our one unstretchable life, of course. The era of the smartphone is known as the death of distance. You don't leave work anymore because it comes home with you in your handbag. Although France is to be applauded for changing its law on employees and email, and Korea here has only recently amended and shortened its legal working hours. We have to reframe well-being in ways like this to address the specific and new challenges of infobesity and the always-on era and the rising digital sea, because there is an explicit health cost when we do not. I'm sure you know the numbers on stress and its impact on global health, but here's just some of them. 60% of the working days lost in the EU every year are attributed to stress. That makes 10 million working days lost in the UK, where I'm from, alone. In the US, 550 million days working a year, with an estimated cost to the economy of $300 billion a year. That's absenteeism, turnover, lowered productivity, and medical, legal, and insurance costs. So infobesity and knowledge must be managed. But what causes the stress in the first place? Is it first and foremost the technology? Well, no. It's more basic than that. It's bad management, poor leadership, impossible deadlines, unrealistic expectations, bullying. Bullying is endemic in the global workforce. In other words, old human problems, not new digital ones. We must adapt to digitalization by not imagining that technology alone is the answer. We, in fact, must take a step backwards to take a step forward. Social health begins not in cyberspace, but in society. We now know that multitasking is a myth, that the estimated 80 separate email interruptions a day fragment our attention, and that productivity and creativity often thrive in a disconnected environment as much as a connected one. There is a converted prison here in Korea for digital disconnection, to free your mind and soul from being always on by being voluntarily disconnected. Mindfulness has, of course, been an outlier of the cure for infobesity, and I certainly try and practice it regularly myself and find it hugely useful when I do. But I believe that a generation now of hard digitalization requires a hardened approach to what well-being means. Rather than focus just on soothing the stress encountered by employees and acknowledging mental health as an issue, welcome though this is, social health has to take a systemic approach and ask, what is the organizational culture doing to make everybody feel so unhappy? I feel we are now ready, more ready than ever, for a discussion about these issues, possibly because it's the first time since the arrival of the internet when our blind faith in technology has been shaken by scandal, by anxiety, and perhaps by a dose of realism. So it's time to get fit in the social era. Now, I'd like to say this was a picture of me in the gym this morning, helping my body adapt to the jet lag. Would you put your hands up if you have been to the gym today or yesterday, or ever bought a pair of trainers or joined a fitness class? Would you put your hand up? Who has trainers? Who belongs to a fitness class? Some of you are being quite shy. Well, congratulations to those of you who said you did. We are part of a global wellness industry which is worth $3.7 trillion and rising. That's bigger than the pharmaceutical industry. It's bigger than the arms trade, so we are told. That is everything from apparel and clothing, the majority, to gyms, all the way down to corporate wellness programs, which are just at the beginning to edge into that market. Globally, the gym market will rise by 11% by 2021. Mental health is now also firmly on the agenda, which I'm going to discuss incidentally in a panel at 5 o'clock today with Richard Layard and others. The way we've developed fitness programs designed to use and strengthen different parts of ourselves is a thriving exercise in trial and error, as everybody knows, in granular pilot programs before something hits the spot and becomes mainstream. What anyone who takes care of the health of their bodies through the gym knows is that you have to make the connection between how you move and how you feel. Getting healthy is both attitudinal and actual, physical, visible. So this is the original definition of health by the WHO. It was made 70 years ago at a time when 2 world wars had ravaged the health of the world and poor socioeconomic factors such as damp housing were further weakening any potential future fighting army. At its most basic, it wanted citizens to be able to function better. What this statement has achieved is remarkable. It simplified a complex set of interlinked problems into some unifying principles which could be acted on in a customized way. 70 years on, we all have a literacy and an understanding that physical and mental health can be achieved by a combination of just 3 factors harnessed together: nutrition and diet, exercise and physical movement, and sleep and rest. In physical terms, we have adapted to the negative influences of post-war posterity, which brought with it a sedentary lifestyle, sugar, refined foods, and the car. And we created an operating system and a set of behaviors from diet to park runs and gyms. We now have measurements, body mass index, cholesterol, every kind of marker imaginable. And for mental health, the biggest single shift perhaps is in culture, that we now talk about it and we make a causal link between poor mental health and those 3 factors. So the WHO's definition, although I'd like them to amend it by the time the SDGs crystallize in 2030, but nevertheless it's done pretty well. It has spawned a huge shift in how it protects its people. But the reference to social well-being has been neglected. It's not yet got a thriving market or a culture in behaviors to address it. None of this particularly mattered for 50 years when improving basic resilience was the priority and when social meant socioeconomic class and not computers. Now we need to know precisely what healthy connection means, what social well-being means. I would like us to have a model, a framework, just as we now do around physical and mental health. And I want that framework to be a functioning marriage between the individual, who must always take responsibility for their own behavior, but the state, the employer, those sources that interact with the individual. Social health, to use a digital analogy, is really well-being 2.0. It's a reboot to focus our attention on functional management of everything to do with connection. Because whether you measure endemic hate on social media, or epidemic absenteeism through stress at work, or stagnant productivity, you can see the markers that social health is being neglected. So I've borrowed heavily from Maslow's hierarchy of needs here to highlight how inverted our true connection needs are. We spend more days posting selfies to reach the most people when in fact the biggest impact is likely to come from small micro connections. Think of that Dunbar number. At tonight's supper, if you are lucky, you will have one conversation where for a moment you connect with someone you're speaking to. Your interests align, you look into each other's face, and you make an intimate connection. That's nothing to do with open rates. It's nothing to do with the number of business cards exchanged. It's about the value of face-to-face connection in a Facebook world. Why? Because trust is transacted with intimacy. Because ideas are exchanged where there is trust. Because people follow you if they believe you. because you can share what you know and help people more when you know them and they know you. So the next time you're tempted to hit reply all on that group email, maybe pick up the phone and arrange to meet someone for coffee. And if you don't think, just in case you don't think, that face-to-face matters more now when you can reach so many more people by putting out a social media blast or a big data email, you should follow the work of Sandy Pentland in the Human Dynamics Lab at MIT. He has demonstrated how productivity literally jumps simply by scheduling coffee breaks in large organizations at the same time. In the UK, an organization called Space Syntax has repeatedly mapped how information connects architecturally in the ways of productivity in office spaces, correlating the flow and congregation of people passing the baton of information from one to another. What I'm describing, of course, is network science. Networks seen not as digital nodes, but as relationships. Networks form the central point of social health. In our rush, we overlook something as simple as relational analytics. And in our rush, we look forwards to the 21st and the 22nd century and not back to the 17th and the 18th century when the Enlightenment brought us the coffee house culture. A siloed coffee shop of the Starbucks generation is not the same as a group coffee house culture of the social health age. There is a risk that the fourth industrial revolution of big data, AI, the Internet of Things and the cloud means that we have made a decision on some level that machines are better than us, that we can outsource basic functions and remain productive, creative, and engaged. I actually don't believe this is the case. I believe social health can help us reclaim the space in which we take a different trio of factors, no less important to our connected health than diet and exercise and nutrition is to our general health. I am a pessimist and an optimist. I believe that if we reclaim the driving seat, we can achieve much more of what we want to achieve. So here is my definition of social health. It is a coalescence around three components. Just as we look after nutrition, exercise, and sleep, let us measure, monitor, and manage our knowledge and our networks and our time, which I call the NOT. Our access to information and information we trust to be truthful, our ability to know people who can help us achieve our goals and who we can build communities with, and having the right time and, crucially, the right time frame are all, I believe, indicators of good, joined-up, connective tissue which impact positively on outcomes. And I found in my research that where this trio of factors is in place, outcomes are usually more positive than when they are not. And I'd like to give you some examples. On the left is a photograph of a beautiful young Gambian artist I had the pleasure of mentoring in London through my business called Khadija Shea. She went to the Venice Biennale to show her work and was due to present her thoughts at a conference I convened. But 3 months before that, she lost her life in the Grenfell Tower of London. This internationally known event was, second to Brexit, the biggest risk to Theresa May's premiership, and a public inquiry is ongoing. But one thing is already clear. There was a complete collapse in communication between different agencies and interested bodies in the management of the building and its risks, and that knowledge, networks, and time worked against and not for the 200 people who were injured, left homeless, and the 72 who died. Information about fire risks were known but buried in mountains of bureaucracy. There was no trusted network operating between any of the interested parties, such as the council and the residents. And time? Well, time is of the essence in a disaster. And time ran out. Some of the fire engines were in the wrong place. Because of poor information flows, the fire authorities recommended a stay-put policy, which, given the flammable nature of the outside of the building, proved completely fatal. And this happened last year in London, and this happens all over the world. Social health is a factor, and we need to start looking for the signals. But on the right is a good news story. On the right is an example of where social health worked beautifully. These are the Wild-Boar football team in Thailand. 12 young boys and their coach became trapped 1,300 feet deep inside caves near the Myanmar border in monsoon season, with falling oxygen, rising water. Nobody could even locate them in the beginning, and most of those boys could not swim. It looked desperate, it looked hopeless. What happened over the next 10 days is not a miracle, but it is a wonderful example, I believe, of social health. A network of 10,000 people from 20 nations spontaneously convened. They had caving skills, scavenging skills, military skills. They combined old technologies such as hay phones in caving with ultra-new sonar drone mesh technology. And they worked together in an evolving, fluid, responsive formation. They used technology, but they surpassed it. In fact, the image most people have of that time was the rather silly figure of the lone hero tech titan Elon Musk, who had produced a rigid submarine that was politely declined by the Thai authorities. He didn't get it. This is the era, if anything, of the collaborative unleader. This is not an era where success is achieved by one person operating in a silo, but by many operating together. So can social health be measured, monitored, and have impact outside of disasters? Well, I believe it can. Health is an obvious example. Here's our brain bank, created by my friend Jessica Morris, who has brain cancer, glioblastoma. And her response to this dreadful illness is to create a campaign and an app of patient data to turn this cancer from being terminal to treatable. And on the right is large company logos, part of a large new initiative based around mentoring in the UK. The challenge being to unlock institutional knowledge and pass it along an organisation in a timely manner, matching senior business leaders with small business owners. Again, this is an example of using knowledge flows, networks in a timely and time-saving manner. There are many corporate examples of social health, but they're all dispersed, and it would be good, wouldn't it, to create an index of it so that we can begin to record what success looks like in social health. Who is harnessing knowledge, networks, and time to their advantage? We should emulate our brain bank and create a brain bank of best practice in social health. Actually, I really do mean that. I think that these components are the same as the WHO components, but they need to be upgraded. I would even suggest that the OECD picks up this baton with the Better Life initiative. So, even though the doomsayers of automation know that some jobs will be created and new skills will overlay the old, we need to worry about the workplace, because the workplace is at the apex of these problems and disconnections between knowledge, networks, and time. The workplace faces the most implementation of new digitalisation, and it is impossible to keep up. I gave a presentation at the European Commission a couple of months ago. It's impossible to keep up because a lot of the energy is going on, guess what? Europe having a supercomputer to beat China. So here's an interesting image. The jazz ensemble At exactly the same time that the internet began this revolutionary moment in 1997, there was a sudden, spontaneous rash of academic papers around organizational behavior, and they all focused on the flow and behavior that happens between people in small groups when they make jazz and they respond reactively, unlike a rigid hierarchy, a siloed orchestra. Connecting to form relationships in an agile way is critical to social health, and whilst it's easy to blame the computer and the technology, the overwhelming, overloading, ever-changing digitalization as the cause, we have to understand that the human has a lot of agency. I believe that we can, with robust micro-shifts, make substantial improvements. So, how about starting to do some measurements? Why can't we measure the hierarchy of communication differently, but just like we measure BMI? What was so groundbreaking 10 years ago about the Stiglitz Sen Fitoussi report, which is now being published with an upgrade, is that it decided to challenge the question of old measurements and to ask candidly, what if our measurements are flawed in order to fit the purpose of the times which were post-crash? So that's what I want to focus on as I bring my remarks to a close. I want to conclude with some concrete suggestions because I hope that you believe, as I do, that social health belongs both to the overall definition of health, but stands alone, dedicated to the specifics of this era of digitalization. And I hope that you believe, as I do, in the same way that it is related to a cousin, if you like, certainly a descendant of well-being as we know it, but which now needs its own measurements and its metrics. Incidentally, I take my inspiration not just from humans that do things like create our brain bank, but from a different species altogether. I take my inspiration from the most productive species on the planet. In the insect world, it is the most social. The honeybee lives and works in the same place, as, thanks to the smartphone, so do we. But it is the shape of where the bee lives, from where it goes to forage, from where it returns to dance, that's also useful for us as we create a model, as we manage our social health strategies. The bees live in a 6-sided hexagon, the hive. The structure is interlocking and crucial to building, cleaning, and storing its core product, which is, of course, honey. Therefore, the framework I use around social health is called hexagon thinking. And it happens to tie in neatly today because this is the 6th OECD World Forum. And 6 is within the cognitive limit of our capacity for ideas, and there are 6 core parts of the human brain. And so when I offer up ideas, they are usually within a 6-month, a 6-year, a 6-week, a 6-team time frame. And I'm going to leave you with just that, 6 ideas. Can we not audit trusted and diverse knowledge flows? Are they blocked? Are they open-minded? Are they accessible? Why aren't we measuring the diversity and depth of social networks? Why aren't we keeping a lookout for groupthink? Have we taken advantage of all our team can offer by the way we organize who is in the room? We need to research time frame and deadline. Time is perhaps the most overlooked aspect of social health. If I could make one radical change, it would be wishful thinking, I know, to remove quarterly reporting from the banking and the corporate system. No good well-being comes of having to meet impossible and often pointless deadlines. What about ranking the hierarchy of communication? What would happen if a Pareto's law of 80-20 were put into evaluating the ratio of face-to-face connection versus electronic communications? And we do need to assess productivity. The management thinker Frederic Laloux has done some very interesting work in this. But we need to prove, is there a link when knowledge flows, networks and time work in better synchronicity? I believe so passionately, but let's measure it now. And finally, let's evaluate disconnection. Let's even consider, with regard to the sixes, that social health perhaps can become the 12th dimension of the Better Life Initiative. And finally, this is the view from the kitchen in my house in Wales, which is a 5-hour drive at best from London. And we go there as often as we can. We slog through the traffic because it's there that we disconnect. We don't even disconnect literally. Of course we have broadband, but we stop being speedy. We stop thinking it is normal to behave like we are super fast computers. And after all, even super fast computers have a mode called sleep. So I thank you for your time. I look forward to building something of a well-being social health network with you and to sharing our knowledge together. Thank you.
Thank you once again for the thought-provoking, wonderful keynote address, Ms. Hobsbawm. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the roundtable session will begin shortly. We invite the speakers of this roundtable session to come up onto the stage. And for this roundtable session, I would also like to introduce a very special guest. Korea's AI robot, Furo, will serve as the MC for this session, taking my place. So speakers, please come up onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please give our speakers a big round of applause, as well as our Furo AI robot, which is right next to me, which is serve as the MC for this session. Please give both of them a big round of applause.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Andrew Wyckoff. I'm the Director of Science, Technology, and Innovation at the OECD. It's my absolute pleasure to moderate this session this afternoon on digitalization and well-being. Just briefly, I just want to set the scene a little bit and then turn to my distinguished panel. So my part of the OECD right now is helping to coordinate a very large project called Going Digital.
Mr. Andy Wyckoff, I'm very sorry to butt in, but we do have to give our Furo a little bit of a chance to have the MC stage for today. So if you would, give it a little bit of time to do the MC.
I'd be happy.
Thank you very much.
Please.
It's a bit slow and it's a bit shy, so just give it a few seconds. Thank you very much for your time.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 6th OECD World Forum. I am Furo, the MC for this roundtable session. Before we start the session, let me briefly explain the online Q&A system, SimFlow. During the discussion, please go to the URL on the screen or scan the QR code, and submit your questions you might have. The QR code can be found on the back of your name badge, and of the leaflet inside the kit. You can also access through the forum application. You can ask a question to all the speakers, or to a specific speaker by clicking their icons. Selected questions will be answered live by the speakers during the session. We will of course also be taking questions from the floor in the more traditional way with microphones. Simply raise your hand when we open the floor to questions and someone will bring you a microphone. We will now begin the roundtable session called Digitalization and Well-Being. This session will explore the opportunities and risks of the digital transformation for people's well-being. focusing principally on how this transformation can benefit people as well as the importance of having solid evidence to help us better apprehend these constantly evolving technologies. Mr. Andy Wyckoff, the Director of the OECD Directorate for Science, Technology, and Innovation, will serve as moderator for this session. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Thank you for that introduction, and just to attest to how real our Emcee is, she mispronounced my last name just like everyone else does. So very, very quickly, my part of the OECD is trying to organize this big, what we call horizontal project, where we use the multidisciplinarity of the OECD to look at complex questions, whether it be climate change or in this case, the digital transformation. And really what we're trying to do here is we're trying to take advantage of this transformation to address persistent social and economic challenges that have perplexed us for decades, and use this transition to begin to address them, and by doing so improve well-being, but also be clear-eyed and recognize up front, as we've been doing already today, some of the potential downsides and how do we prepare for them and preserve well-being. Now, I'm a guy of a certain age, and I've been watching this transformation from about the mid-70s and know it's been going on since at least the 60s. So we're 50 years into this. And back then it was mainframes, then it became PCs, and then in the 90s it became the internet. And so what's the big deal now? I mean, what's different now from what we've seen before? And when I begin to think about this, I say at least three things. The first is we got half the globe connected. So we've crossed a threshold that we've never really had before. And as I said, things go viral, both in a good way and maybe a bad way. Second, everybody carries this pocket computer with them that we call a smartphone, which allows us to have a transactional capability with individuals we could have never thought of before, which is really transformative. And with that comes a new era of data. This device and many, many more that are about to come, and what's called the Internet of Things throws off immense amounts of data that allows new innovation, such as machine learning and the beginnings of AI, as well as things like targeted advertising. And this is just beginning. And so with this device, I think we've seen a shift from the economic side, that back office automation of the 70s and 80s, to now much more of a societal impact. And that's really what we're discussing today. And with a new set of societal changes, some of them positive. I can Skype my kids who go to university across the Atlantic. I can avoid traffic jams. And as Christine said this morning, she sleeps better thanks to that tracker. But there's many negatives too. We've talked about them. Many of us are deluged by emails that create stress. There's cyber addiction that occurs now, and what some have come to call surveillance capitalism. Now, that sets the scene for our discussion this afternoon. I've got these 5 great panelists, and we're going to talk about some of these issues and draw on the experience of different parts of the world in doing so, and also begin to look at one of the fundamentals of this conference, which is how do we begin to improve our evidence base in our measures. Let me start with Mr. Jang, Deputy Minister, Office of ICT Policy here in Korea. Korea has always been at the forefront of the digital society and economy. And I'd like to ask you, what is the potential for the digital transformation to improve people's lives within the next few decades? And with that, what are some of the potential negative effects that maybe are already appearing?
Good afternoon. I'm So-kyung Jang, Deputy Minister of Ministry of Science and ICT. Actually, my English skill is not good, so I speak Korean. Okay? 박수 소리가 작은 거 보니까 이 영어가 좀 하는 게 좋을 것 같은데 죄송합니다. 사실 앤디가 되게 어려운 질문을 주신 것 같아요. 디지털에 미친, 디지털이 가져올 긍정적인 효과, 부정적인 효과, 사람마다 생각이 다를 수도 있고 관점이 다를 수도 있는 그런 아주 어려운 문제라고 생각합니다. 근데 그 디지털이 가지는 그런 속성들, 영향을 출발할 때 저는 가장 먼저 디지털이 가지고 있는 특징이 뭔지, 디지털과 우리가 대비되는 아날로그가 어떤 차이가 있는지 이런 점에 먼저 주목할 필요가 있다고 생각합니다. 잘 아시다시피 이 디지털의 기초 단위는 비트라고 할 수 있습니다. 아날로그 세계의 아톰과 달리 비트의 특징은 제가 보기에는 몇 가지가 있는데 가장 큰 것은 이 비트 같은 경우에는 이걸 그 생산할 때 한계 생산 추가적인 단위를 생산할 때 비용이 더 들어가지 않는다는 거죠. 한계 비용이 더 들어가지 않고 또 이 일반적인 이 아톰의 어떤 물질들 경제재들은 제가 가지게 되면은 다른 분은 쓸 수가 없는 거죠. 예를 들면 이 통격기 같은 경우에 제가 가지고 있으면은 앤디는 못 가지는 그런 성격이 있는 거지 그렇지 않습니까? 그렇지만 이 디지털의 기초가 되는 비트의 경우에는 내가 가지더라도 다른 사람이 카피해서 얼마든지 쓸 수 있는 이런 속성의 차이가 있다고 생각합니다. 그래서 거기서 출발해서 본다면은 이 디지털 트랜스포메이션은 우리 사회에 있어서 개인이나 기업이나 국가 사회 전체적으로 여러 가지 어떤 기회를 줄 수 있다고 가능성이 있다고 생각합니다. 앤디께서도 말씀하셨지만은 가장 먼저 생각할 수 있는 것은 저는 이 디지털이 되면서 여러 가지 혁신이 좀 더 쉽고 편리하게 일어날 수 있다는 겁니다. 이 디지털이 가지고 있는 데이터들을 결합하고 융합하면서 이 새로운 어떤 혁신이 일어날 수 있는 그런 가능성이 많이 있다고 볼 수 있습니다. 예를 들어서 우리가 흔히 얘기하는 우버나 에어비앤비 같은 회사들은 우버가 자동차를 가지고 있지 않고 에어비앤비가 호텔을 가지고 있지 않지만은 이 디지털상의 혁신을 통해서 이 새로운 가치를 창조한 것처럼 개인에게도 그런 게 충분히 가능하다는 거죠. 스카이프 얘기를 하셨는데 사실은 이 한국에 앉아서 들어가기 어렵다는 이 하버드의 스탠포드의 교육과 과정을 강의를 무크로 들을 수 있지 않습니까? 교세라나 이런 다양한 그런 이 가능성 때문에 디지털은 분명히 우리에게 기회를 줄 수 있다고 생각합니다. 일상적인 개인 생활에 있어서도 앤디도 말씀하셨지만은 우리가 교통을 이용할 때 훨씬 많이 내비게이션들이 내가 가야 할 경로를 해결해 줄 수 있는 것이죠. 그래서 역사적으로 봤을 때 예를 들면은 처음에 산업혁명이 일어났을 때는 이 공장에서 일하는 사람들 공장 근로자들은 뭐 어른들도 있고 애들도 있었지만은 10대 애들까지도 하루에 10몇 시간씩 일했다는 것이죠. 그렇지만 그게 세상이 바뀌면서 지금은 뭐 나라마다 조금씩 다르긴 하지만은 일일 8시간씩 주 40시간 근무 이런 것이 보편화되고 있는데 이 디지털의 어떤 확산이 더 가능해진다면은 더 적은 시간을 일하고도 분명히 더 어떤 가치를 창출해낼 수 있고 인간 본연의 어떤 그런 활동에 집중할 수 있지 않을까. 개인적으로는 개인적 관점에서 그런 게 분명히 있다고 생각합니다. 그 다음에 기업 관점에서 봤을 때도 아까 전에 에어비앤비나 우버 얘기를 들었지만 그런 것처럼 경쟁의 어떤 원천이 그전처럼 토지 노동 자본이 얼마나 경쟁력을 가지고 있느냐 이게 아니고 디지털 상에서 얼마나 많은 데이터를 확보하고 그 데이터를 잘 활용하느냐에 따라서 경쟁의 방식이나 경쟁의 성패가 결정된다고 볼 수 있습니다. 그래서 작은 기업이더라도 그런 디지털 트랜스포메이션의 어떤 기본적인 자료를 잘 활용하면은 충분히 가능성이 글로벌 경쟁력을 확보할 수 있다고 그렇게 생각합니다. 그리고 사회적으로 봤을 때도 교통 문제나 환경 문제, 에너지 문제 이런 문제들을 이 디지털을 적용하면서 충분히 해결할 수 있는 그런 가능성이 열릴 거라고 생각합니다. 제가 말이 좀 길어지나요? 근데 조금 부정적인 면을 보면은 가장 대표적인 것은 디지털 디바이드라고 볼 수 있겠죠. 이 디지털 디바이드는 개인적인 관점이나 또 기업 관점이나 국가 관점에서 같이 볼 수 있다고 생각할 수 있습니다. 개인적으로 이 급하게 변화하는 이 디지털 트랜스포메이션을 적응하지 못하는 분들, 사회적으로 그렇지 않은 사람들은 훨씬 더 기회 자체가 상실되는 것이겠죠. 그래서 거기에 대해서 고민할 필요가 같이 있고, 기업 관점에서 이 디지털 디바이드는 분명히 일어난다고 보고 있습니다. 흔히 얘기하는 플랫폼 경제가 되면서 플랫폼을 가지고 있는, 플랫폼을 소유하고 있는 기업 중심으로 경쟁의 원천인 데이터가 축적되고 그 데이터를 활용해서 새로운 비즈니스 가능성이 일어나고 있기 때문에 이 기업 관점에서 디지털 디바이더, 이것도 큰 문제라고 생각이 됩니다. 또 다른 디바이더는 국가 간의 디지털 디바이더 충분히 일어날 수 있다고 생각합니다. 유럽에서 GDPR을 금년 5월부터 발동시켰지만은 많은 데이터들이 플랫폼이 있는 국가로 갈 수 있다는 그 문제. 그래서 결국은 데이터를 생산하는 국가에 있어서는 별로 데이터가 축적되지 않고 플랫폼이 있는 나라로 가서 그 플랫폼에 축적되면서 그 데이터를 가지고 있는 국가가 경쟁력을 발휘할 수 있는 그런 여건이 되는 그런 디지털 디바이드가 분명히 문제가 될 수 있고, 다른 한 가지 네거티브한 그런 효과는 사이버 시큐리티겠죠. 여러분 잘 아시는 것처럼 모든 것이 지금보다 훨씬 더 디지털 트랜스포메이션이 되고 연결된다면은 한 곳에서 해킹이나 바이러스가 일어나면은 우리 생활 자체가 훨씬 더 많이 영향을 받고 피해를 받을 수 있다는 것, 그런 어떤 네거티브한 효과가 있을 거라고 그렇게 생각을 합니다. 네. 이상입니다.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jung. Let me turn now to Lorenzo. And you've had the privilege to spend a lot of your academic career in South Africa. Now you've returned to Italy, where you have a political position. And I'd love to ask you, having had both those experiences, can you begin to tell us what do you see as some of the potential risks and opportunities for citizen well-being from the digital transformation?
Thank you, Andy. I think, like, to sum up what I think are the pros and cons of the up-and-coming digital transformation, I'd say that the most relevant one, the potential, is the possibility of integrating people across cultures, across countries, across continents, and so on and so forth. And the potential downside is the alienation, and actually the opposite, disintegration that comes with that. And I think, at the end of the day, it boils down to what is the policy target that a society wants to achieve. Technology is not neutral. You can steer towards an objective or towards the opposite objective. I mean, I'd like to remind my students, up until a few months ago, as you highlighted, I was still an academic professor, that John Keynes in the 1930s wrote that by 2030, 100 years later, most of the population around the world would be basically working no more than 15 hours a week and spending a lot of time playing the guitar and making love and writing poems. And we're likely not to see that happen, because the digital transformation, the industrial revolutions of the 20th century have created new ones, and have created ones that are fundamentally unnecessary in many different levels, right? Do you know what is the most viewed videos on Facebook these days that occupy a lot of time? Are usually cats playing. So that tells you that, in a sense, the digital transformation needs political guidance. Societies have to decide whether we want to go towards an economy that maximizes consumption, whereby cats and dogs and spending time on Google checking things that are fundamentally unnecessary to our life is a sign of progress, or an economy that wants to optimize the resources we have. And optimization, when it intersects digitalization, can really bring about a new fundamental industrial revolution. Means producing less, but producing better. May mean producing locally. I've seen this happen in Africa. When you have an optimization input and renewable energies, and you connect the two, you can bring energy wherever you need it. You don't need huge infrastructure anymore. You can really do that kind of leapfrogging that is often talked about. And the same applies to more developed societies, right? When you use technologies with a vision with the view to optimize the resources you have, you can increase the well-being. You can increase the free time you have. You can lower transaction costs. You can have an economy that really produces more positive externalities and fewer negative externalities. But when the input is about maximization, you get exactly the opposite. And given the fact that this is an OECD forum and we talk a lot about the economy, the fact that we still have economies that are fundamentally working on the principle of maximization of consumption, the fact that GDP tells us how much we consume, not the quality of that consumption, that countries that optimize resources are generally not rewarded internationally. I do not recall one country that intentionally reduced consumption and increased the well-being of citizens and was rewarded internationally by either the World Bank or the IMF or the European Commission as a good case of success. Usually it's the opposite. So my sense is that unless we somehow embrace the responsibility to offer policy guidance, the digital revolution will most likely be directed at increasing consumption, at finding new ones, and we're going to be sitting here, 2018, in 12 years' time, and realize with a lot of sadness perhaps that John Keynes' prediction was totally wrong. He didn't consider the fact that the kind of economy that we're based upon, which is on spending, increasing ones, finding all sorts of ways to show that conspicuous consumption is somehow a good indication of progress, will then use the digital transformation to increase the potential for spending, increase the potential for consumption, even when this consumption is detrimental to society and the environment. I mean, like, we often talk about the possibilities of the digital revolution when it comes to lowering our footprint on the planet, but so far there's no evidence of that either. Spending, one Google search consumes as much energy as making coffee for 6 people. And often, when you make coffee for 6 people, at least you have a conversation, people come home, there is social capital being built. With Google search, we often look for something we don't really care about. We just do it because we feel lonely and we want to get a sense of whether we can learn more. And most of those searches are, and I'm a big fan of Google. I think it's made our life much better in many different ways. But there's also an increasing amount of searches that have got just to do with very superficial needs and wants. And the same applies to all the other social networks. So again, I go back to what I said at the beginning. We do need policy guidance. The digital revolution will not save us. We have to save ourselves and push the digital revolution in a direction that is desired.
Thank you, Lorenzo. We're going to come back to some of these. I just want to ask Malavika now. There's lots of good promise out there about data-driven innovation, kind of reshaping how we deliver healthcare, educational services, and in some cases the environment, although, as Lorenzo says, maybe it hasn't come to pass yet. But a lot of these techniques depend on what we would call big data, and with that comes some other downsides, particularly in terms of the security of the data and people's personal information. How do we get this balance right?
I mean, I really dislike the balancing metaphor. I think the road to privacy hell is paved with balancing metaphors, but that apart, I think we construct a false binary when we think you can either have innovation using data or you can have privacy. I think you can have both. It's an optimization problem to a certain extent, but I think it is definitely possible because you have so much research around privacy enhancing technologies, around things like differential privacy, where you can actually harness the benefits of data without necessarily compromising people's personal privacy. You can have aggregated data. You don't need to know very, very intimate, sensitive details about someone in order to get learnings at scale. So I think when you set it up as a false binary between these two, I think that's problematic. And I think we use these metaphors in a really irresponsible way when we talk about, big data as, the new gold, the new oil, the new currency, whatever is, flavor of the day. But when we do that, we don't tend to think of it as an environmental hazard, as something toxic, as big data as kryptonite, or something that has, a half-life whose value diminishes over time. And I think we need to be really careful in the way that we frame data use so that we're not privileging extraction. I mean, if we want to go down the data, as oil resource, it is extractive, it's inequitable, it privileges a few. So I think even within the same faulty metaphors, there are other dark sides that get unearthed. And I think to the extent that we keep talking about human rights and privacy as something dead, something redundant, anachronistic, as something that is no longer central to the discourse around development and innovation, we are not going to get that balance right. We think of human rights as a cost, as a compliance problem, as something that is no longer central to these debates, and it's something that is a matter of privilege. But I think if you don't make these rights central to any kind of idea of development and innovation, you are going to end up with very toxic externalities. And I think if governments and policymakers were to actually preserve rights and actually lead by example, instead of selling away health data from the NHS to private companies or giving over entire cities to become smart cities, which could be wonderful in other ways, but I think the conditions on which you have these partnerships really matters. If you could have privacy by design, by default, rather than something that's an afterthought as a bolt-on that you add once you've designed the entire project and then say, oh yeah, we have these pesky little human rights lawyers now clamoring for something, or you have NGOs and activists wanting this to be more equitable, and then it's not going to work when you add it at the fringes and the edges. You need to make it central and by design. So I think governments and policymakers could actually lead by showing what ethical, responsible innovation looks like, and by actually baking those into legal systems. And I think especially in this part of the world, we have all the discourse and the hysteria around development and innovation often in a policy or a legal vacuum. You don't necessarily have the social norms and the legal norms that would actually allow innovation to be responsibly implemented. And I think as long as we keep thinking that we're enthralled to innovation and that law is kind of the boring piece of it, I think we will lose out and get that balance wrong.
Apologies for my bad metaphor. I'll come back to that. But I want to move to the statistician in the crowd, John, because as we were saying before, I think measuring it gives a good rigor to some of the concepts we've been discussing here. You work for one of the better known national statistical organizations of the OECD, and you're aware that the world is changing around you. You've been subject to some criticisms about measurements. How do we ensure that our statistical system keeps up to date?
Okay, so as a statistician, I describe my job as to mobilize the power of data to help people make better decisions. So as statisticians, we are at the heart of this data revolution, trying to both uphold rights and make sure that the right to be informed is also respected. But a key role, therefore, for me, is that we are in this profession of helping decision makers, helping provide an evidence base that helps us decide between the alternatives that the politicians discuss. So the essential requirement for us is to observe and to listen and to make sense of how people are living their lives and the decisions that they face if they want to make them better. So the criterion I will adopt in answering your question, Andy, is whether the kind of evidence base we create does indeed help our governments, our businesses, and most of all, our citizens make better choices. So talking about digitalisation and well-being maybe one at a time. So for digitalisation, I can find out what the use of Amazon for my shopping is doing to the retail sector. I can make sense of cybercrime and how that fits with other kinds of crime. I can think a bit about the value that I get from free services like Google Maps or WhatsApp or these kinds of things. But I see the digitalisation in the context of the decisions is part of a picture, but not a picture that I would ever want to assess in isolation. For well-being, I think what we see is a new way of confronting what the economic measures are saying with how we are living our lives. So in the UK, thanks to the wisdom of my predecessors, we now have many years of well-being data, and we can see a trend. And it's a surprise to many, the trend is upwards on each of our main metrics. People are reporting better well-being now. And you can see the extent to which an education makes you feel better about life, and poor health or a disability makes you feel less good about life. But it also throws up a significant policy question. So when you look at well-being by age, young people and old people are doing pretty good. But people like us are not doing so good. And yet we celebrate the fact that the labour market is a good thing, being employed is a good thing, and yet we are the group who are employed. So it makes us ask some questions about the nature of employment these days. Is it making us feel better, or are we feeling our lives are more precarious? We have to juggle different jobs to make ends meet. So the wellbeing agenda gives us a wonderful complement to the information we get from thinking about digitalisation. So when I think how we go forward, I think you need to look at a spectrum of measures. So GDP, we always talk about GDP. GDP matters and will continue to matter because it tells us about incomes and outputs and expenditures. It particularly helps our governments who need to collect tax to work out whether money is still available to be taxed. It gives us a fix on those things. But it doesn't give us everything. We need to extend beyond that. But for digitalisation, just before I go on from that, GDP creates some new problems for us in measuring how you distinguish price and quantity. So you and I were talking earlier about telecoms sector, a highly digitalised sector. The new bundles you can buy from telecoms give us orders of magnitude more power. So the price goes down. We have to be much smarter in measuring that in GDP. Going beyond GDP, we need to think about the intersection between what we know about things that can be priced, which things that intersect with the world of prices: natural capital, human capital, social capital. And digitalisation and well-being both intersect those two, but are part of the picture. Going beyond that, we think about welfare. We think about how much we gain from clean air or safe streets. Digitalisation can either help or hinder those things. And we see all around us, it is essentially neutral, but it's how we harness digitalisation to make things better rather than worse. On well-being, answering the question, how's life, tests all these other metrics. But the final element, which we haven't talked about at all yet, but I think we need to in this context, is the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, what I think they do, as well as being universal and comprehensive and allowing us to have the kind of conversation that we've just heard, is they allow us to connect with the interests of different communities. They allow us to think what matters most here or for us, or how does it create an ability for us to communicate with them? And I think that's the way forward. This is where I finish now for statisticians. Martine, Joanne, and I both often quote a phrase that came up during the referendum debate in the UK a couple of years ago, where someone was asked about the change in GDP. And the response was, that's your GDP, not my GDP. For our statistics to be useful at all, we have to make them connect with people. For that, we need to listen. We need not to think about grand theories. We need to think about what are the decisions people face. How can we use data to give people power to right injustices and help people create prosperous lives for themselves and their families into the future? Thank you.
Thanks, John. Let me just finish this first round with Wyckoff. And you've talked extensively and written extensively about the digital revolution and its impact on business. Can you pivot a bit and talk to us a little bit about how you think digitalization can have an impact more broadly on society, and what role culture may play in that?
Thank you. I'm a digital anthropologist, and what that means is that I research the intersection of technology and culture. So how technology is influencing what we believe, what we think, how we parent, how we date, So looking at the real human side of it. I want to just echo my agreement that I also hate these analogies of data is oil, because I actually think a truer form would be, data right now is our blood, it's our identity. And when you say that it's oil, it sounds very impersonal, like there's a distance. But when you think about what it is that we're sharing pieces of ourselves, especially around the wellness space, that have a big intimacy. We're sharing our sleep cycle, our hormonal cycle. We're sharing the money that we have. We're sharing the cycles of our anxiety. We're sharing our marital issues. We're sharing the food that we're eating. We're sharing our moods, the medications that we're on. These are very personal things. And so when we talk about wellness, and when we talk about technology, and when we talk about the intersection of the two, I think it's incredibly important that we don't forget the cultural piece that underpins many of these issues together, which is, what are the values that we as a society are placing on these tools? So I'd like to kind of mention just very briefly 3 different ways that we can think about some of the ways that culture and technology are intersecting. So on a very broad level, the first way is to think about how technology and our use of technology is influencing what we expect as citizens and as consumers. And I'll give you an example. So most consumers, most citizens today come into touch with at least, on a daily basis, at least 10 to 15 apps or services that are personalized. So whether it's the weather that your phone uses to tell you the weather where you are, to your Spotify playlist, your Netflix queue, your Amazon purchasing guide, your everything, all these apps that you're using that are giving you custom tailored information for you. So what are some of the consequences or some of the byproducts of living in a culture where we depend on personalization? Well, for one thing, it has created the expectation that we are only going to get content that is tailored to our beliefs. And maybe it's fine when it's about what movie we're going to watch or what book we're going to read, but what happens when we're talking about facts, when we're talking about news? What happens when all of a sudden I only read news that reflects the world to me in the way that I want to see it? So this is a byproduct. Nobody says, hey, I want to ignore everything and only see what I want reflected. This behavior in our knowledge consumption has been trained into us with how we've been using all of these apps for entertainment purposes. So the first thing is we need to really remember that every app that we use, the technology ecosystem, will drive our expectations and our behaviors in ways that we might not even be aware of. The second cultural piece is to look at what are the values and what is the worldview of the tools that we're using. Because as these AI algorithms become more sophisticated, as we use more and more of these tools, it's their worldview that we're now using as a lens to see the world. So for example, when you have a company like Facebook who doesn't, who as a principle believes in radical transparency. This is not going to tell you this is right or this is wrong. This is just what they believe. That worldview about radical transparency, that is going to influence every single tweak to every algorithm, every new feature of that technology, every new platform, every new thing that they do is going to be guided by this worldview. And when you have Facebook, which has 2 billion people on it, then one company's worldview suddenly has an incredible global impact. So in another way, even think about a company like Twitter, where Twitter's worldview is that information can be communicated in bite-sized bits, 280 characters. That's a worldview that says that complex ideas can be reduced to a couple of lines. But as we know, we live in a very complicated, complex world, and I don't think that issues like immigration or prosperity or inclusive growth can be summarized in 2 to 3 lines. And yet we're teaching people to skim in bite-sized information, and we're losing the ability to deep dive and to spend our attention looking and exploring at these issues. And finally, One of the things that I also haven't heard talked about is our own psychological attitudes, our own cultural values, both around technology, how Facebook and Amazon are considered the heroes of the era. When you ask people who are your idols, we say Elon Musk, we say Mark Zuckerberg, we say Bill Gates, and that this has a role as well in how we perceive the value of these tools. Because what we're starting to see when we think about, overwork, when we think about work-life balance, is we're starting to see that there are companies that are trying to put policies in place, but these policies are failing. Netflix tried to put a policy where it was giving its employees unlimited paid vacation time. Take as much vacation time as you want. Do you think that people actually took this vacation time? No. Not because they were afraid of management, but they were afraid of what their colleagues would say. They were afraid of being judged as being not hardworking, of not wanting that promotion, not working late hours. So we also talk about work and John Keynes about his, vision of leisure. I think John Keynes also missed the obsession that our society has attached to work as a part of our identity. Work ethic, how hard we work, how long we work, what we do for work, all of those things have become such fundamental and important part of who we are as a society that any policy around reducing the amount of work that people do or trying to create better working environments has to tackle this very real human element. I'll end up by saying that, I don't think this is a technology issue at all. I actually think this is a human issue. And that before we can start framing how technology is going to influence wellness, we need to be sure about what our values are for our society and what are the qualities, what is the worldview that we want. Because as Lorenzo said, technology is neutral. It is a mirror. And that mirror is going to show us and amplify everything that we think is true right back to us.
Thank you very much. So after this first round, I take away at least two conclusions. One is we ban the metaphor, data's the new oil, which I'm very much in favor of for other reasons. That said, I think it has allowed some people who maybe aren't as well versed as this audience to appreciate that it's this new source of value to the economy, but one that maybe comes with, as oil does, externalities, as we say where I work, that need to be taken into consideration. The second thing is that, and that's why I like about this conference and some things going on across the world right now, we are not techno-determinists. We can affect this. That's why policy is here. And we've done it with other technologies. There's no reason why we can't do it with this one. Now, I do think what's going on is maybe a broader-based change. And I wonder historically if these conversations occurred when the steam engine came about or the motor vehicles began to appear on the road and people were discussing, yes, but it'll lead to suburbs, and do we want suburbs? I doubt if those conversations occurred, and that's why it's good that these type of conversations are happening here. And with that, let me turn back to the Deputy Minister, Jang. And Korea has been at the forefront of the digital society for a very long time. I was here a decade ago where we were celebrating this in Korea. And I want to ask you, what is the Korean vision for where you want to be through this digital transformation, and what type of societal and economic goals do you want to make sure are achieved?
네, 상당히 좋은 질문인데요. 우리 앞에 패널들도 쭉 말씀을 해주셨는데 기본적으로 이 한국 정부에서도 디지털 트랜스포메이션 시대에 이 소통과 공유 이런 문제를 상당히 많이 고민을 하고 있습니다. 그래서 작년에는 한국 정부 전체적으로 우리 한국 사회에서는 지금 디지털 트랜스포메이션을 주로 4차 산업혁명이라는 말로 이렇게 많이 부르고 있습니다. 그래서 21개 부처가 공동으로 해서 작년에 이 4차 산업혁명 정책 방향이라는 청사진을 만들었습니다. 이 4차 산업혁명 디지털 트랜스포메이션 시대의 어떤 기본적인 정책 방향을 사람 중심의 4차 산업혁명 이렇게 정했어요. 사람 중심의 4차 산업혁명이란 것은 이 4차 산업혁명, 디지털 트랜스포메이션을 통해서 그 트랜스포메이션을 이끌어가는 주체가 또 사람이고 그 변화의 어떤 혜택을 보는 것도 결국 사람이 되야 되는 거다. 그런 뜻을 사람 중심의 4차 산업혁명이라고 이렇게 이제 저희들이 정의를 내리고 아이코리아 4.0이라는 정책 브랜드 네임을 붙였습니다. 이 아이코리아 4.0의 기본적인 내용은 디지털 트랜스포메이션이 가지고 있는 기술, 산업, 사회적인 변화를 한국 사회가 어떻게 준비하고 대응해야 될지에 대한 그런 나름의 어떤 입장입니다. 그래서 이 디지털 트랜스포메이션이 가져올 첫 번째 기술적으로 저희들이 준비해야 될 부분에 대해서는 가장 중요한 어떤 기술적인 인프라가 되는 것이 저희들은 DNA라고 이렇게 이름을 붙였어요. 데이터 네트워크 AI 이렇게 붙여서 결국은 여러 번 얘기 나왔지만은 데이터가 뭐 원료라든지 뭐든 이런 말을 하든 안 하든지 간에 결국은 디지털 트랜스포메이션의 어떤 기초가 되고 출발점이 되는 것은 데이터일 것이다. 그래서 한국 사회에서 있어 여러 가지 데이터들이 많이 축적이 될 수 있고 또 그 축적된 데이터들을 어떻게 잘 활용할 수 있는지 이런 부분들을 고민을 하고 그걸 정책적으로 좀 실현하려고 하고 있습니다. 뭐 다른 나라에도 그렇지만 한국에서도 이 개인정보 데이터에 대해서 보호와 활용에 대한 이슈가 많이 대립되고 있습니다. 그래서 어떻게 하면 아까 전에도 말씀이 나왔지만은 데이터를 잘 보호하면서도 활용할 수 있는지 그런 부분을 좀 사회적인 합의를 이끌어 가는데 초점을 맞추고 있습니다. 이제 제가 개인적으로는 작년에 그 대통령 직속 4차 산업혁명위원회라는 곳에서 일을 했는데 한국 사회 같은 경우에 사실 소통이 어쩌면 부족할 수 있었는데 이 개인정보나 이런 문제에 있어서 이 소통을 하기 위해서 예를 들면은 해커톤이라는 그런 정책 방식을 도입해서 원래는 이 정부 정책에 참여하지 않았던 시민단체까지 이 개인정보에 대해서 논의하고 토론하면서 나름의 어떤 결론을 이끌어내는 그런 걸 좀 한 경험이 있습니다. 그래서 데이터를 그렇게 보고 있고 그 다음에 결국은 이 데이터가 흐르려면은 데이터가 소통이 되려면은 네트워크가 중요하다고 생각하고 있습니다. 그래서 한국 같은 경우에 이 네트워크의 어떤 기초로서 디지털 트랜스포메이션을 촉진하는 네트워크의 기초로서 5G를 생각하고 있습니다. 그래서 내년 3월에 최초로 어떤 그 이동통신 기반의 5G 상용화를 추진을 하고 있습니다. 하고 있고 그 다음에 결국은 AI가 또 세 번째 DNA에서 AI를 저희들 상정하고 있는 것은 결국은 AI가 디지털 트랜스포메이션 4차 산업혁명을 이끌어가는 어떤 핵심 요인이라고 생각하고 있고 그래서 그러면 이 AI를 어떻게 발전시킬 건지에 대한 고민을 하고 있습니다. 그래서 금년 5월에 AI R&D 계획을 정부 차원에서 만들었고 아까 전에 얘기했지만 디지털 트랜스포메이션이 가져올 그런 부정적인 영향이나 이런 거에 대해서 AI 분야에 있어서 어떤 기본적인 윤리 강령 이런 부분들을 우리에서 권고를 하고 준비를 하고 있습니다. 그래서 이 인프라로서 DNA를 준비하고 있고 그 다음에 결국은 기술이 산업에 영향을 미칠 거다. 그래서 산업적으로는 이 DNA 데이터 네트워크 AI가 어떻게 여러 산업 분야에 적용이 되어서 산업의 효율성도 높이고 또 사회적인 문제도 해결해 나갈 수 있을지 그런 고민을 했습니다. 그래서 12개 분야 예를 들면은 이 DNA 기술을 시티에 적용한 스마트 시티, 그다음에 농업에 적용한 스마트 팜, 또 이 국방에 적용한 스마트 국방, 의료, 금융 이런 여러 12개 분야에 이런 디지털 트랜스포메이션을 적용하기 위한 그런 준비를 하고 있고 제일 어렵게 정부에 생각하고 있는 것은 기술 경제적인 변화에서 이어오는 이 사회적인 변화, 사회적인 준비를 어떻게 할 부분에 대한 고민이 제일 큽니다. 이 부분은 사실 앞에 두 가지 기술적인 변화나 산업적인 변화보다는 좀 더 시간이 많이 걸리고 이 사회적인 이 소통과 합의가 더 필요한 그런 분야라고 생각하고 있어서 큰 방향을 정했지만 아직 구체적인 내용까지는 준비를 못 하고 있습니다. 예컨대 디지털 트랜스포메이션이 됐을 때 그러면 우리 애들은 우리 후손들은 어떤 자질을 준비를 해야 되느냐, 어떤 역량을 가져야 되냐, 학교 교육이 그걸 어떻게 서포트를 해줘야 되느냐, 이런 분야에 대해서는 뭐 다른 나라도 그렇지만 한국에서 이 교육은 아주 뜨거운 이슈입니다. 모두가 교육 전문가이기 때문에 이 교육부 사람들이 상당히 고생을 하고 있는데 정말 그런 자질이 디지털 트랜스포메이션에 맞는 역량이 무엇인지에 대한 그런 고민을 같이 하고 있고, 또 이렇게 디지털 트랜스포메이션이 되었을 때 일자리의 변화가 일어날 수 있는데, 그럼 일자리가 바뀌었을 때 새로운 직종에서 새로운 직업에서 필요로 하는 그런 또 능력은 어떤 것인지, 지금 현재 직장에서 있는 사람들이 어떻게 준비를 해 나가야 되는지, 그런 분야들에 대한 고민은 하고 있습니다. 그렇지만 거기에 대해서는 아직 사회적인 합의나 준비가 아직 좀 부족하기 때문에 좀 더 이렇게 시간을 가지고 준비를 해 나가야 되는 거라고 그렇게 생각을 하고 있습니다.
Thank you very much. That seems like almost a perfect lead-in to our Deputy Minister of Education, who's here today, Lorenzo. And Lorenzo, I want to have a little fun. I want to deviate from the questions you've already seen.
I know it.
Yep. And I want to go back to what you're saying about communities, because I think that's incredibly important, not only for education, but for well-being, and a sense of who we are and who we are looking out for, and so forth. And I'm struck that digitalization has really changed our sense of community. In some ways, it's broadened it. We now have friends around the globe, which would have been impossible for my parents really to think about. But it may have weakened things locally. Your party came to power using some of these tools and building a new community. Can you tell us how you think communities will evolve?
I completely agree with you. The experience, I don't know how many people here know that my party was created just 5 years ago. And in 5 years, and basically with no money, it got 33% of the votes in our country. Right? So, and it's been possible because of the internet. So we've done extremely well at communicating over the internet, but I have to admit, we're not as good at communicating with each other. So like our party is still struggling from internal conversations, like it's hard often to hold an assembly and to be able to actually discuss issues on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's, in a sense, it shows the huge potential of the digital revolution, but also the need, as I said, to go back to leadership. And leadership can, and I don't think that, like, as I said, technology is potentially neutral, but I don't think that we take policy seriously enough. Often I hear governments and policymakers saying, and also business leaders saying, well, technology will fix it anyway, so we don't need to have a problem with that. I think some of the speakers today said the same, like we don't need to worry about it. Things will become easier by default. And my experience is that that's not the case, that you do need leadership in politics and you need leadership in education at the very least. We do need education as fundamental to create a generation of users, citizens, potentially not just consumers, a very bad concept that I think we should overcome. Consumers are bacteria, not human beings. We exist because we are able to communicate and we're able to interact. We're not just here to consume. But I think, an education model which is very different from the one we've had so far. The future through the digital revolution will be increasingly mediated. So you do need an understanding. You do need a level of consciousness that allows you to understand that mediation is somehow a fake. Behind, as I said, each and every Google search, there is a big computer somewhere burning fuel and polluting the planet. Behind an Uber driver, there's a story. There's someone working hard in order to provide that service. Behind the water coming from the tap, one day maybe coming in a bottle, who knows what, there is a river which is being probably polluted and sacked, and the resources are being used. So when the mediation expands, our level of consciousness diminishes. And I fear to think of a generation that will not have that ability. And somehow, because I've got 2 young children, I see that potential. I see the potential of ignorance, of somehow this mediation becoming so preponderant that people simply ignore how things work. And I think education has to change in order to compensate for that. And I think this would be really, really useful. Really useful also because we do need a different level of understanding of how things work in society. I think for too long we've had economists that totally ignored the biosphere, and they could talk about infinite growth as if this was, just like a fiction rather than a real planet. We've had engineers that for way too long ignored the fact that a bridge has to be built within an ecosystem, and people will have to drive over the bridge. And so it's not just a matter of concrete molecules, but it's actually users and the overall ecosystemic impact. We do need, an education model that allows us to reconnect, overcome the mediation. If we're going to be using all these tools to really improve the quality of life and have a positive impact on well-being, we're going to be able to have that level of consciousness that makes us understand that connecting is always important. Connecting across people, but also connecting across sectors and across areas of knowledge. So economists that understand that whatever they do needs to be connected to the biosphere, and biologists that do the same, and engineers and so on and so forth. More and more of that. Otherwise we're going to end up in this gigantic kind of shopping mall world in which the separation will be massive. And I think this is the job that governments will have to lead, but also business leaders and intergovernmental organizations. There is a total need for this kind of awareness and moving the agenda, the policy agenda forward so that the technological revolution doesn't just happen. And often when we simply say, urbanization is a given, that the fourth industrial revolution is happening and so on and so forth, in a sense we're almost preparing ourselves for that, and as a consequence we're enacting policies that make it happen in a certain way. If we were to take a step back and say, well, if urbanization has to happen, what kind of urbanization do I want? Somebody said this morning, what is a desirable future towards which I want to go? Rather than simply assuming the future is going to happen no matter what, and all we need is to be prepared. I think being prepared is important, but leading the change, being proactively trying to steer it in that direction is fundamental. And this is what we try and do with the Ministry of Education, and I think the same applies to all the other levels of government.
Thank you very much. Let me just say I've got some great questions streaming in, which I really appreciate. So I'd ask my panelists, I'm going to move to a more concise round here and then get to these. But just quickly, Malavika, you've worked in both developing world and more the developed world. Can you tell us about the relative risks and opportunities, and what about this leapfrogging concept, and what about maybe the alternative concept of kind of social dumping into those developing countries?
Yeah, I think there are maybe sort of 5 axes around which I see this being very different across developing and developed. One is the idea that progress and technologically driven progress in particular is inevitable, that it somehow comes fully formed, you don't really have any agency or choice in shaping it, and that it's something that is going to happen. You might as well get on board and embrace it because our robotic overlords are there and we can't really push back. And I think within that is bundled a certain kind of privilege, this idea that rights are a luxury, and if you want development, then you're just going to have to suck it up. So I think that's sort of an intertwined idea. The second is I feel in the developing world we're increasingly moving towards centralization at exactly the point that the developed world is seeing its flaws. You have more of an idea to decentralize, unpack, make things more distributed, whether it's distributing risk, distributing servers, using Tor, using encryption, and using blockchain. And I think we're trying to say, no, let's join everything up to have a full picture of the human and their relationship to society. So that's another trend I see, which is different. And I think within that is also, I think the third one is the idea of it being a top-down process where technological evolution is seen as something almost paternalistic and neoliberal, where it will be done to you. You are an object or a target of development. You're not an active participant. You're a passive recipient of largesse. And I think within that is very closely linked the idea of beta testing. things that might not fly in a more developed country because there are laws and regulations preventing it, but the kind of analysis you can do through AI in countries here because there's nothing preventing a state having access to and using citizen data, but also around things like social credit or biometrics or identity, where it's this very top-down process where let's beta test it on a very large population, look at the ways in which they break down, fix them, and then export them to other countries saying they've been tested on 1 billion people. So I think that's problematic, and I think finally I'll say there's a very inverted idea of trust. In a lot of the world, measures to produce greater fairness, accountability, and transparency are being pushed, whereas here, the citizen is seen as faulty in the eyes of the state and has to constantly prove legitimacy, prove they exist through identity mechanisms, prove that they're trustworthy. A lot of things like the social credit system are around proving that through behavior you can analyze whether somebody is worthy of a government's trust, which is a very twisted, upside down idea of trust, instead of it being something citizens should use to expose governments as being untrustworthy in certain ways. And I think in all of this, the fifth thing I would say is a very weird way in which cultural relativism is enacted. The same companies that when it comes to certain policies, they're not willing to look at local facts. They say, oh, it's a one-size-fits-all. We're a global company. We can't, have different policies around the world. We want, something consistent. They're the same companies that are willing to lower standards in countries saying, but privacy is not an Indian value or a Chinese value, so we should be respectful of local culture. Suddenly they care about culture when it means they can lower the ceiling rather than raise it, right? So I think that is a very cynical thing that I'm seeing. And I think ultimately in all of this, we forget that people ultimately might want the same thing. People in India might want all of the internet, not something that's a walled garden that violates net neutrality, because somebody in a Western economy decided that some internet is better than no internet. Why don't you ask the people who don't have that internet whether they would like all of it or a tiny little siloed idea of what that is? Because ultimately they're humans at the end of the day, and they want to watch pornography and play games, not just look at Wikipedia and be enriched and educated, kicking and screaming against their own will. So I think ultimately people want the same things, but we ignore that in trying to be benevolent in a very paternalistic idea of developing them.
So, thanks. We'll come back to that. I want to take one off the sim flow for John.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's the current model of free access to online
차안에
services.
뭐 쓸 수 있다고 그랬는데 모르겠네.
Still has the mic.
이걸 예.
This is what happens with technology when it's not controlled.
Okay. I guess you can read that, huh?
Almost.
And I think it's an interesting question. Do people know that it's really not free, John? Those free services. And how is a statistician? And it goes to some of the things that Lorenzo's been saying about the true cost of a search, let's say, having some environmental costs, and we see it in advertising. How do we begin to think about this as we think about economic performance and social well-being?
Well, I think to answer that question, you have to go, so what is the question you're trying to answer? These businesses that are providing online content have a business model. They get their money from somewhere, from their advertisers, whoever it is. And in the traditional realm of economics, that's how it works. There are customers and suppliers, and money changes hands, and some content is created that enables the business to prosper. The thing that's kind of new for us is content that is creating some kind of welfare for us, but is actually free to us. And there are a bunch of techniques being generated to look at how you measure that surplus, and you can monetize it, but that's going to be a little bit frayed at the edges because money isn't changing hands. But you can certainly look at it in a well-being context. because you can see how much better is my life because I have Google Maps. How much better is my life because I have WhatsApp. And you can start to see whether there is a digital divide between those people who are making significant use of these services and not. So I think I answer this question by referring to my earlier answer. Your response to the question depends on the precise thing you're trying to understand. If you're trying to understand how economies work, you want to see how money is changing hands between the different actors where money changes hands. If you're trying to look at whether the production boundary is shifting in or out because somehow non-monetized services are displacing monetized service. The travel industry is a good example of this. There's lots of free content now that means we don't need travel agents. So GDP is smaller as a result, but welfare may be bigger. So you disentangle the various elements of this and repackage them to answer the particular social or economic questions at hand.
Thanks. Rahab, one of the things we haven't talked about here is geography much. And I want to raise that because I know you've talked about urbanization, but when we started that project I was talking about at OECD, I reread Toffler's Third Wave, where he wrote this in 1980. It's a remarkable book because he got so many things right if you go back and read it. One of the things he didn't get right, at least not immediately, was this concept of an electronic cottage, where he thought we'd all be sitting on Walden Pond with our broadband, enjoying the wonders of nature and logging in to do our work. But we've seen exactly the opposite happening. We've seen a greater urbanization, and there's some reports out recently that suggest that urbanization actually leads to more digitalization, that tacit knowledge flow that can happen really thrives with digitalization. What do you see as some of the benefits and some of the consequences here? How do we begin to even out the geographic distribution of both?
Wow, it's a hefty question. I think one of the most interesting developments, both from a positive and a negative view, is how a lot of these digital tools are remapping the world. And what we're seeing now is we're seeing the rise of the world's first global digital culture, where ideas and belief systems and innovations and experiments are freely traveling borders, even when those digital borders have sensors, even when those digital borders have restraints. We're seeing ways that the information is passing through. We've seen it in Turkey, where activists using Tor were training other activists how to mask their identity and how to circumvent the government blocks on the internet. We saw it in France, where agents, I'm going to say, from various countries were creating private groups to teach certain members of French political groups how to increase their digital warfare tools. We see it in wellness spaces on the positive side. We see patients exchanging information. We see citizens that are able to exchange the benefits of a treatment, of a doctor, of information. But we're also seeing it bring together increasingly polarized viewpoints. One of the communities that I track is a community on Tumblr that is a pro-anorexia community. It is a community that is run by young girls that is teaching other young girls how to develop and hide an eating disorder from parents and from medical professions. So I think what we need to almost revisit the way we look at geography and revisit the way we look at this new population, because on an upside, I think it's connecting people, it's connecting citizens to civic services and governments. But on the negative side, if not handled properly, it's creating these silos where people are forming their own digital cities, where all they see and all they act and all they interact with are people that are just like them. So for me, I think it goes back to some of the themes that we were talking about earlier, which is, how are we able to create a civic life or civic engagement on a city level or on a country level or on a national level that reflects inclusiveness and that reflects diversity. And one thing which I always find really interesting when we look at city development is that cities are often talking about all of their investment in technological infrastructure. We're making smart cities, and as the minister said, smart farms and smart transportation. But one of the things that I'm not seeing enough of is the integration within this technological view of the city of the future of things like the humanities, like arts and the creative sciences and social sciences. We've become so focused on STEM and making sure our children can code and making sure that we've got them into computer sciences that we have generations of kids now that have no context of human history, of art, of philosophy, of classics. And so how can you envision a future and build an inclusive, diverse future when you have no context to how we got here in the first place? So, you know, to me, I always say that I think cities are one of our greatest weapons because they bring communities of diverse people together. But I think that when we envision cities of the future and when we envision sort of the technologies of the future, we can't just keep looking at these technologies. There is an imbalance. The reason we're seeing all of these things happen, these unideal circumstances and scenarios, is because there is an imbalance in the teams of the people that are making these technological decisions, an imbalance of the lack of certain people at the table, whether they're women or minorities or people of color or the wide, diverse. So we're seeing this imbalance. And so then people turn around and they say, oh, it's Google or it's this or it's the technology, when in reality it's just reflecting this imbalance back. And that imbalance also includes a creative imbalance as well. So I think to answer your question, I really feel like we need to start planning for technological diversity and inclusiveness more than just bridging the digital divide. We also need to bridge the creative divide and the gender divide and the language divide and the literacy divide, as we heard this morning, and the shame divide. And we need to start talking about this as a regular part of living or being a connected member of a democratic society.
I think that's great, and that brings us back to the well-being theme, certainly. I want to try the sim flow again, because I want to bring us back to the other theme, which is which indicator should be the KPI, the key performance indicator, to describe, how successful digital transformation is. So help us think through a more rounded type of indicator beyond GDP, certainly, that can tell us what's the success we want to try to reach in the digital transformation. And I'll pick on the statistician first, but I encourage all of you to answer this.
Well, I think it's absolutely inevitable that different people will have different KPIs that are most salient to them. So why I promote in my presentation at the beginning the SDGs is they give us a dashboard that enables us to integrate those different viewpoints. And I think that's how you can begin to answer some of the earlier questions. That we've got a society where people are living in different bubbles. But part of the problem is they're not aware they're in a bubble because there's no visibility of actually a different viewpoint. And I think it's perfectly legitimate for people to have a different idea of what good looks like. Our problem is that we have no respect or connection with people who have a different idea. And I think the digital revolution itself, maybe my KPI is actually whether we can create this information base that enables us to converse across these different communities. There you are, I even answered your question.
Anyone else? Panelists?
Just a very, very quick comment, which I think it's almost in the question you have the answers, which indicator, where I feel like it should be which indicators. I think one of the things that I see a lot is we see people talking about, oh, unemployment numbers are really low, and that's a great thing, but then they don't talk about the fact that wage stagnation and income inequality are still impacting people, and that even though more people than ever are employed, the number of people living below the poverty line might be growing in certain countries. So I would love to see more holistic approaches where we don't just hang our hat on one KPI and instead start building a more realistic and a more nuanced version of the world to understand the story.
Yeah, I agree. Like in a sense, the answer to this question is the answer to this event. Mm-hmm. So far, we've been looking at the digital transformation mostly in terms of consumption opportunities, right? And the paradox, as John said, is that at times it's the other way around, right? Like we consume a lot of things for free, or apparently for free, and then you're conventional indicators like GDP tend to go down, and probably John has followed. A couple of years ago, there was a debate in the United States of America whereby government was blaming it on the Silicon Valley if there was a decline in productivity because too many people were on Wikipedia for free and not buying an encyclopedia anymore. Too many of them were using Google Maps for free and they were not buying maps at the store anymore. So all this nonsense that only, with all due respect, at times some statisticians come up with. But I think, in a sense, if well-being, I think Joe Stiglitz said here that now there is consensus that the economy is a means to an end. I think the same applies to digital transformation. There should be consensus that the digital transformation should be a means to an end. And what is the end? Is John Kane's dream. 20, 30, 15 hours a week, and people having a lot of time to make friends, make love, and play the guitar, or any other instruments that they like. I think that should be the indicator. If we're harnessing the incredible potential, I'm a firm believer in the power of the digital transition. I just hope humans are ready for it, that they are smart enough to see that this is now, for the first time probably in history, we can increase the quality, not the quantity of something. I think this is a fundamental watershed, and I'm wondering whether we have the tools to be able to guide this process in that direction. We don't have a lot of time, and I think the good indicator would be, are we increasing the well-being? And we can come up with all sorts of measurements. I don't mind locally driven, top-down, and so on and so forth, up for discussion, as long as it's grounded in what, people's indications as well as science, to see that this is an opportunity to create a kind of economy that, as I said, optimizes what we have rather than maximizing consumption, which is in many different ways what is going to drive us towards self-destruction.
So I'm going to turn to Malavika if she wants to answer this, but I just want to give Lorenzo credit. He began to throw out some indicators: leisure, making love, making music. Which
this was John Keynes in the 1930s.
Okay. But that's what I'm struggling for a little bit, is some sense of well-being in this era. Certainly, there's Maslow's kind of hierarchy, which is important as well. But I guess I just want to begin to, we need many indicators. I certainly accept that. What do they begin to look like?
Can I just add to
quickly?
Very quickly. Look, we've said how important it is that we somehow customize our idea of well-being. Not everyone has the same idea of well-being. However, and I think that is fundamental. Right. However, scientific research has shown us a couple of indicators, right? A couple of indications. We thrive as humans when we have connections to other humans. We're a social animal, so there needs to be a component of social connections. You cannot thrive in isolation. This is known, okay? So a person that has friends is healthier. A person that is well-connected in a family lives longer. And the other one is the fact that we are part of ecosystems. A person that lives immersed in a thriving ecosystem has stronger health, has a positive effect. If you're sick and you're sitting by a window that overlooks a lake, you heal faster than if you're overlooking a parking lot, even if you're in a smart city. So I think having these two components, these are very important, say, nature and society. This is how you start building a well-being dashboard. Then we can look at the details, but this is where to look at.
I'll come back to you in a second. Malavika.
I think to me what would be a set of really good indicators is where all the indicators of economic progress and technological innovation, whether it's number of patents filed and GDP and all of those things, when they map to a free press, to an active civil society, to health, when all of those, when the same countries that win the Press Freedom Index are also the ones that have all the economic indicators that show technological progress, that's when I think we really have a balanced society, because otherwise you have certain countries doing really well from the point of view of technology and innovation because they've achieved it by duress. And they've shrunk civil society, they've doubled down on dissent, and I think in all of this, choice is really, really important, because I think we talk so much about inclusion. What if I want to be excluded? I don't want certain choices that I make to be conscientiously out of certain narratives or certain mainstream things to disadvantage me and prevent me from being an active citizen. I think the costs of exclusion are as important as the costs of inclusion. So I think that's a really balanced and healthy world.
No, I think so. This is good. But I just want to come back to your concepts of family and friends and ecosystems, which I think we would all agree with. But in a digital, looking 10 years out, both of those can be digitalized.
Yeah, great idea.
And I apologize to all my LinkedIn friends out there, but you're not the same as my real friends, okay? and so I want to ask you, are these perfect substitutes? I mean, do we begin to count that 500 plus LinkedIn friends as the same as what you would have in the community? And likewise with an ecosystem, you can have a completely digital ecosystem where you can be sitting next to a lake, but it's on a screen. Well, I'm just asking you, and it could be a very good screen soon. I mean, the difference may be hard to detect. Will that count in your indicator?
Look, I hope we don't get there. I hope we don't get to the point of not being able to make friends that we have to rely on our Facebook connections. I hope we don't get to the point of not having clean air so that we can breathe into an oxygen mask and pretending it's fresh air. But let's look, there's a potential. There's a potential that we'll understand too late what is that makes us happy, and we're gonna have to recreate it one way or another. But there's also potential, as I said, to harness it before it's too late. Because one thing, for instance, that I have seen around the world is that for so many times, they told us it was too complicated to map ecosystems or to map social networks. That's why we have GDP, because it's easier to send a fax or a quarterly update from your business to the government and they can count. And it's easy to do that. The digital transformation is making it easier to monitor real-time ecosystem degradation. It's making it easier through citizen science to collect data on a number of platforms, sending all the data to a centralized network that can recount it, control it, and guarantee quality control. So in a sense, the digital transformation is making it possible to do what we intuitively know we need to be doing, which is to harness a variety of complex information and translate it into something that a policymaker like me can use on a regular basis to decide what is good for the country, what kind of policies to enact. And I think that's a great potential to invert the kind of self-destructive journey we're on.
I was going to say that I think if we're going to keep, as Rahaf was talking about, we privilege STEM and everyone needs to learn how to code, why aren't computer scientists learning how to have ethics, right? I think that's equally important, but I think we're getting really, really, really good at counting and not so good at analysis. So if all you have is producing data scientists, but you keep defunding the social sciences and the humanities that can make sense of the noise and actually extract signal out of it, I think we're not going to see the whole picture. We're just counting as an exercise in numerics, but we're not analyzing what those numbers mean in ways that are meaningful and empowering. And you're losing out a lot of the nuance and the really the implicit messaging and signals that we're getting. So I think it's not enough to just count.
No, well-being matters, doesn't it? John?
Well, only just to respond to both of those comments. I mean, one of the profound things that digitalisation allows us to do is adapt more quickly to kind of changing environment. So I hosted a meeting last week that had a number of small island states present, and we looked at how we understand what's happening in our oceans. Now that was almost impossible to analyse until very recently, but now we can see how much microplastic there is, how much acidification there is, how much species depletion there is, how much warming there is. And it's easy to look at quite a localised level what kind of interventions would make something better. Before now it was not much more than guesswork. So I think a key success measure is whether we are actually harnessing that potential and shining a light on the things which previously were literally invisible to us.
I think that's a powerful point and a positive one whereby, we can use these tools to kind of iterate back and make sure that we're achieving the well-being standards or PKIs that we wanted. Rahaf, let you have the last word on this panel.
Wow, thank you. I think I just want to say that when we talk about this, we should pay attention to the language that we're using. So, you know, when we talk about contribution, when we talk about productivity, it's like if we want to shift the conversation, and I love this idea of the nature dashboard of nature and society, then we have to stop reducing people to the sum of their output and to the sum of the fact that their only value in being counted is a monetary value by how much they are producing. Because, you know, then you start having this language where we are just valuing things, whether consciously or not. We're saying, you know, you're only counted, you're only valued if you are a consumer, if you produce. And then that leads into all sorts of identity crises where people don't know what to do with themselves when they have this leisure time, because they feel like if they're not producing, then they don't matter. So when we do talk about contribution to society, I would love to see it expanded. I would love to see, as Lorenzo said, we now have the ability to measure so much more than we could. I would love to see the type of labor measured in terms of like caregiving and domestic care and child rearing, and a lot of this labor where it, you know, economies are dependent on it, but it never gets counted where it matters. It never gets counted from a financial perspective. So let's expand our conversations around contribution, but let's also maybe start shifting the language of how we talk about the worth of us as human beings. We keep talking about wellness, and we talk about you know, human-centric, and yet all we do is reduce people to a job, reduce people to productivity machines. And I think that needs to be some of the conversation, because once the language changes, then the metrics, I believe, in the way we frame the problem will go on. You know, what would a metric look like if we were measuring people playing instruments or people doing these other things? We wouldn't call them productivity. Maybe we would call it something else.
I knew I could depend on you. With that, please join me in thanking the panel for what I thought was a really thought-provoking session.
Well, thank you to our moderator as well as the panel of speakers for a fruitful discussion. Thank you once again, and please give another big round of applause, as well as to Furo, our AI robot Emcee as well. Thank you very much. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of this session. Thank you once again for the great session and the interesting insights. So before starting the next session, we'll have a short coffee break of about 30 minutes in the lobby. Coffee and snacks are ready outside for the participants, so please enjoy the refreshments that we have prepared. During the coffee break, the Be Better and Statistical Office of the Republic of Slovenia will have a brief presentations on their work in the premier ballroom lobby, so I kindly ask you for your continued interest and participation. So after the coffee break, 4 parallel sessions will take place.